Hi everyone, Shelley here. I'd like to share a couple of methods with you on how to apply masking fluid. You're going to need a few items. What I'm going to start with here today is colorless removable masking fluid. There is a permanent version as well, so make sure that you get the right kind. And you want to make sure that it's fresh, and it should be about the consistency of cream. You don't want one that is all gummy and getting thick and yellow. Always use fresh masking fluid for the best results. So we're going to be using that. We'll be using a small cup to put it in, a small brush for doing the masking. I will be using a little bit of soap. You could use hand soap, liquid soap, a bar of soap, anything like that's fine. I'll be using a crepe tool, a soft rubber crepe tool, a toothbrush, and I'll be using a sea sponge. So those are the tools that I'll be using for this demonstration. And the first thing I want to do is make sure that my masking fluid is stirred. You notice I'm not shaking it. The reason you don't want to shake it is because you don't want to have bubbles in there that can pop and leave holes in your masking. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my masking and pour it into the cup. And you can see that it's very liquid, but my paper is white and the masking fluid is white, which makes it a little bit hard to see. So what I'm going to do, in order to make it a little easier to see when I place it on the paper, is I'm going to add a little bit of color to it. So I'm going to use some cobalt blue for this. I'm just letting it drip down the side of the cup. I don't want to put my brush right into the masking fluid. Let's put a little bit of color in here. Now the cobalt blue is a non-staining color. You want to make sure that any color that you decide to add to your masking fluid is non-staining. I'm just going to stir it with the handle of my brush. And now I have a nice blue masking fluid that I'll be able to see quite easily. And now with my smaller brush, I'm going to dampen it, and I will dress it with a little bit of my soap, and that is in order to keep the masking fluid from adhering to the bristles of the brush. And I'm going to apply a bit of soap to it all the way up to the ferrule, because I don't want any of the bristles to be exposed to the masking fluid directly, because it will stick just like gum in your hair. So what I'm going to start with is just using a brush to apply a few lines with the masking fluid. So I want to give you a couple of tips that might make it a little easier if it's something that you've always struggled with before. Okay, so I'm going to use a longer bristle brush so that I can load more in the length and not just on the end. And I'll take just the tip of the brush and do my lines very fine. And you can see that by using a brush that's not a really old brush, or using a stick as some people will do, I can actually get a fair bit of control here. And because it's bristles of the brush, they do hold a little bit more, and it'll release the masking fluid a little bit more uniformly. Of course, you don't have to do just straight lines. You could do any kind of a shape. Or you may have a shape within your design that you need to paint within. So it might be something like a flower. Might have a nicer looking flower than I have. But what I want to do here is I want to pick up some masking fluid on my brush. And you notice I'm not starting right at the line. I'm starting close to it, but not right at the line. So once I drop a little bit of the masking fluid there, then I spread it. And that will keep my edges nice and uniform without having a big blob where you first touch the paper. So you place a bit of masking fluid away from the line and then pull the masking fluid to the line. And you'll find that that will give you a little bit better control. Okay, so that would fill in an area very nicely. If it's a particularly large area, I like to put on 2 thin coats instead of 1 thicker coat, because sometimes you can miss a spot or might get a little air bubble or something like that. So by putting on 2 layers, you've got a much better chance of making sure that you have everything covered. So now the next thing I'd like to use is the sea sponge, and I'm going to just dampen it in the water and wring it out well. Now before I go placing a sea sponge into my masking fluid, I want to dress the sea sponge with a bit of soap as well. So this is just a liquid hand soap. I'm going to put a little bit on there, and it's very important, once again, you don't want to be squishing it too much and making suds. I just want to work the soap through the sea sponge so that the masking fluid doesn't stick to it. So then I'm going to pinch it a little bit, and I'll dip it into my masking fluid, and with a light touch I'd like to apply it. Now you might use something like this method for you know, if you were doing a tree, for example, that had white blossoms against a deep blue sky or something like that. So you'd want to protect the white of your paper for the blossoms, and you could do it quite nicely with this method. So I'm going to pounce on very lightly some of the masking fluid. And it'll create quite a nice foliage effect. Okay, and this would just be rinsed out with soap and water. It's got plenty of soap in it, so you probably just need water. Now while this is wet, I can take my liner brush again, and I could draw branches through this if this happened to be some sort of foliage or a tree. Put some branches through there. You notice I can use my liner and get some pretty fine lines there. That's a little tricky to do when you're just using a sharpened stick or something like that. Okay, and I do actually have a couple of bubbles there. I'm just going to pop them with my brush. There we go. And the last method that I'd like to use is to use a toothbrush. I've got a well-loved toothbrush here. I obviously use it a lot for other things. And I want to actually dip it into my masking fluid. And if I want to get some very fine lines, I can actually add a little bit of water to my masking fluid to dilute it a bit. There we go. And once again, I'll use the handle of my brush, not the bristles, in order to stir it. So now my masking fluid is diluted a little bit. And I will dip the tips of the bristles into the masking fluid. And I'm going to just touch it onto a paper towel so that it doesn't, so it's not overloaded. And rather than holding my toothbrush bristles up and flicking that way, I'm going to put the bristles facing down, because if I have all the masking fluid on the tip and then I hold the brush this way, it's going to settle in where the handle is, and it could actually drip off onto your piece. So I'm going to hold it facing downward, and I will use my finger to pull back on the bristles, which in turn will shoot the masking fluid towards the paper. So I will aim with the brush, pull back with my finger, and I can get some very nice spatters. This is great for doing things like stars in a sky or snow or something like that. Textures for rocks or bricks or anything of the sort. Now, of course, if you're working around something else, you may need to cover what you don't want spattered. And so now this will have to dry completely before we can add some paint on here. But this will act like a very nice resist, and we'll be able to paint freely without having to worry about working around all of those shapes. So now we'll just let